when the Warriors lost themselves the opportunity to secure a playoff spot against the San Antonio Spurs. You guys saw me completely lose my mind and I went insane against Steve Kerr. And that is why after this game, after this predictable loss against the Clippers, I am not surprised, and that is why I am not going to flip out, because we all knew coming into this Clippers game, the Warriors had a distinct size advantage against this particular team. And of course, they still had the Jonathan Kuminga issue. The only way the Warriors would come away with a victory in this game is if Steve Kerr maximized his rotations and understood the hierarchy of importance of the players that are on his roster. One of the guys that is up there in terms of importance is Guy Santos, and he did not get a single minute in this game. While once again, Buddy Hield got all the minutes instead, the Warriors are now playing 3-guard lineups and 4-guard lineups. Yeah, they're actually back to playing 4-guard lineups with the season on the line, and that is Steve Kerr for you. And how about that final play in overtime where the Warriors had an opportunity to tie the game with 6 seconds left in overtime, and guess what Steve Kerr does? He draws up a play for Buddy Hield. Buddy Hield takes a shot, and it isn't even remotely close. I mean, I just don't understand who Steve Kerr thinks Buddy Hield is. I mean, even if you ended up making a play for Klay Thompson in that situation, even that is questionable because Steph Curry never even got a touch. And Steve Kerr elected to go with Buddy Hield. As soon as I saw him put Buddy Hield into the game, before the play even developed, I said, oh no, this game is about to be over. But believe you me, that is far from the only problem that the Warriors had because of Steve Kerr. The handicaps that are being created by Steve Kerr with these lineup combinations is going to ensure that the Warriors are not going to be able to go very far this season. So from a fundamental standpoint, there's a lot to go over here. But before we do, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe, hit the notification bell, and that like button so that this video can get out to all the Warriors fans out there. And hopefully, again, somebody in that front office. As a matter of fact, after I make this video, I'm going to make another private video and send it to somebody who is in the Warriors organization that I know. And I'll break it down as clearly as humanly possible in hopes that he will consider my message and share the information with Steve Kerr. Because yes, this is a man who was very, very, very close to Steve Kerr. Okay, let's get straight to it. The first thing that happened that is of major change is that Jonathan Kuminga was not in rotation. And that was the difficult but the right move for the Warriors to make. Moving forward, actually, because Jonathan Kuminga does not fit this team. They have tried it over and over and over again since his return, and they are not playing anything close to playoff caliber basketball with him in the rotation. Whatever games they were able to win, a lot of them they were able to win despite the fact that he was in rotation. Just like they were able to win a bunch of these games despite the fact that they're going with these small lineups, the small starting lineups that don't make any sense, and a bunch of broken to questionable combinations where the players that actually should be playing are not even playing. To be honest with you, I did not see that one coming, and because Kuminga was out of the rotation, it gave me some hope that the Warriors might actually be able to pull this off. But then I saw the starting lineup and I'm just like, okay, if this is what Steve's gonna go with both in the first quarter and the third quarter and possibly to close the game, well, this game is gonna be very difficult to win because you're giving up way too much size, and wouldn't you know it, they got out-rebounded 42-25. It's pretty hard to win a game when you're giving the other team a 17 rebounding advantage. The last I checked, sometime late in the fourth quarter or early in that overtime, the Warriors had given up 14 second chance opportunities to the Clippers. And then you think about how much they lost this game by. Look, the Warriors are going to be smaller than the Clippers no matter what lineups they play, but they can at least increase their odds of better competing against their size by putting out enough size of their own. And the Warriors simply could not do that because Steve Kerr put out a bunch of lineups where your mind should be blown. You should be devastated and you should be calling for the firing of Steve Kerr for the decisions that he made in this game with everything on the line. So let me give you some lineups where it makes no sense for the Warriors to do. First and foremost, we saw the return of the 4-guard lineup. With Guy Santos out of the equation, Steve Kerr elected to go with a lineup of Steph Curry, GP2, Buddy Hield, Moses Moody, and I believe it was Looney at the center spot. 4-guard lineup. When is the last time we have seen that since they acquired Jimmy Butler? Basically, never. You know, part of the reason why the Warriors started to play so much better basketball once they acquired Jimmy Butler with no Kuminga in the equation was because Guy Santos was a fixture part of what they were doing and what they had been doing. And they were great with him in rotation for 2 months. Why did Steve Kerr waste 2 months of Guy Santos in rotation if he was just gonna give up on him the moment things got important? The players that you have to trust the most are the ones that prove themselves the most and prove to be a huge reason why the Warriors were winning the games that they were winning. And why is Guy Santos so valuable? It's because he's able to rebound better than a lot of these smaller guards that cannot rebound. Guy Santos is borderline 6'8", and yet he rebounds at the rate of a power forward center. And that ability alone pays huge dividends when the Warriors elect to go to smaller lineups, because these smaller lineups now don't have to worry about their lack of size anywhere near as much as when they decide to go with 3-guard lineups featuring Steph Curry, Buddy Hield, Pods, or Steph Curry, Pods, and GP2, which is the lineup that Steve Kerr elected to close this game within the fourth quarter as well as overtime. And guess what? That is too small. So when the Warriors are running these lineups, no matter how well Steph Curry is playing, I have no confidence that they're able to come away with the win, because on the other end of the floor, there's mismatches everywhere and they're not going to be good enough defensively to get stops. And if you can't stop the other team, it's going to be hard for you to win the game. And that's exactly what happened here, just like that's exactly what happened against the Spurs. See, it doesn't matter if the Warriors are going up against the Clippers, or whether they're going up against the Spurs, or whether they're going up against the Jazz. You guys remember when the Warriors gave up an 11-point lead to the Utah Jazz in the final 3 minutes of the game because Steve Kerr elected to close that game with Steph Curry, Pods, and Buddy Hield combination. And that combination couldn't even stop Jordan Clarkson. You can't stop Jordan Clarkson with that combination, and you're expecting to stop James Harden and Kawhi Leonard combination? So there's too much incapability from a one-on-one standpoint. There's too much requirement in terms of rotations because everybody is constantly having to help because there's mismatches everywhere. When you're closing the game, you need to limit the mismatches as much as possible. And with Pods in there, that's Steph Curry and Pods that can get switched. You gotta turn that into one limitation and not two, because two makes you unserious defensively, and that's not a real closing lineup. And that's why in real time, I'm screaming my little head off, talking about how they need to change this lineup or else they're not going to win this game. Yeah, my mind is blown. I don't know how a competitive coach can think that a lineup of Steph Curry, 6'2", Pods, 6'4", and GP2, 6'2", is somehow good enough defensively, not only in terms of one-on-one defense, but then being able to rebound, even if they do manage to get a stop. Jimmy Butler and Draymond Green, left alone on an island against Zubac, is not good enough. And Quinton Post got 10 minutes in this game, and Trayce Jackson-Davis got 0 minutes in this game. Quinton Post can't even rebound when the rebound is right in front of him half the time. There was literally a possession where Pods got a stop against Bogdanovic, and Post is right there for the rebound, and he's just not able to grab it. It's right in front of him. And then Bogdanovic gets an offensive rebound and takes a shot and puts the shot back in. And these are the kinds of things, if you're trying to play playoff caliber basketball, it can never happen with players like that in rotation. Steve Kerr is literally prioritizing shooting over defense. And that is never a viable way to win anything in the playoffs. This is some of the most unserious coaching I have ever seen in my life, and it happens year after year after year with Steve Kerr. And that's the same reason why he chooses to go to tiny lineups with Buddy Hield in there over Guy Santos, because Buddy Hield can shoot. Meanwhile, he's getting targeted by the Clippers, and guys like Kawhi Leonard, James Harden, and even Norman Powell are licking their chops seeing that Buddy Hield is out there for them to play around with. But apparently none of that matters to Steve Kerr because Buddy Hield can shoot the ball and Quinton Post can shoot the ball. And as long as these fundamental errors are happening where Steve is prioritizing the guys in his roster that shoot better even though you have much better defenders, it is Steph Curry and defense that is going to take the Warriors anywhere this season. And if Steph Curry has to rely on Buddy Hield next to him and Paz next to him from a defensive standpoint, the season's over, guys. The Warriors are not doing anything, and Steve Kerr is gonna go down in flames while playing Buddy Hield to the ground and apparently Paz to the ground as well. I've just so had enough of this crap. Steve Kerr needs to be off this team after this season. I mean, just think about the history of Steve Kerr over the last 3 years. 3-guard lineup and 4-guard lineup against the Kings and the Lakers in the playoffs. You're playing Wiggins, Moody, GP2 at the power forward spot all day. You're playing 3-guard lineups that failed them all throughout the regular season of that season with Steph Curry, Jordan Poole, and Klay Thompson. Not good enough defensively. Steve Kerr just runs it to the ground anyway. It's one thing to do it in spot minutes at best when the Warriors have some advantage in terms of overall momentum. It's another thing to play a bunch of 3-guard lineups and think that your defense is going to be good enough against any playoff caliber competition. And then last season, of course, 4-guard lineups all day and night. Corey Joseph, Potts, and Steph Curry lineup is closing in overtime in the final possession against the big Lakers team. Of course, they end up losing that game as well. You prioritize Dario Saric over Trayce Jackson-Davis all season long, only to find out towards the end of the season that Trayce is way more viable than Dario Saric. And after having learned that lesson, he goes back to the exact same mistake of prioritizing Quinton Post over Trayce Jackson-Davis once again. And the Warriors simply don't have enough defensive ability, rebounding ability, size imposing factor. All of these things are vital ingredients to be a playoff caliber team. So when these fundamentals are not in place, it doesn't matter that Steph Curry's going off, and it doesn't matter that Jimmy Butler's going off, and it doesn't matter that Paz is giving you offensive production because your defense is not good enough. And let me make it clear about Guy Santos in rotation. It's not like I'm saying Guy Santos is going to go in there and stop a guy like Kawhi Leonard or James Harden. Because regardless of whether you have Moody in there, whether you have Potts in there, whether you have Hield in there, or whether you have Guy Santos in there, they're going to get scored on. The key factor is when those guys inevitably miss shots, are you going to be big enough to go and grab that defensive rebound to take care of at least that end of the floor? If you're failing in terms of both perimeter defense and your ability to rebound, you have nothing on defense. Positional ability is a basic requirement to win any basketball game, preseason, regular season, postseason, whatever. These are fundamentals that you have to cover if you want to be a good team. You allowed the Clippers to shoot 56% from the field and 47% from the three-point line, and you got out-rebounded by 17 rebounds. You see why it doesn't matter what the Warriors are able to do offensively, even with both Jimmy Butler and Steph Curry having 30-plus points in this game? If you don't have the basics covered, if you have to play through handicaps created by your own coach because he's more concerned about shooting than your overall defense, then the Warriors are not going anywhere. So it's layers of issues created by Steve Kerr that he has to basically undo. He started that with Jonathan Kuminga. Now he needs to get Guy Santos in rotation over Buddy Hield, and you need to get Trayce Jackson-Davis into rotation over Quinton Post if you want to play real basketball with any kind of force on the defensive end of the floor. Otherwise, you can score 119 points going into the overtime and still lose that game because you gave up 124 to the other team. And I'll go over some of the other key things that happened in this game. But unless Steve Kerr fixes up on those fundamentals that I just discussed, the Warriors are not going to be serious. And ultimately, that's the bottom line. So now I'll get to some of the nuances, okay? First of all, Steph Curry played through the thumb injury, as you know. And from the standpoint of executing and being poised, he just wasn't good enough for like the first 3 quarters of this game. And the size of the Clippers really bothers Steph Curry alongside the POA ability of both Dunn and Derrick Jones Jr. But in particular, Chris Dunn is a major problem because he's one of the most elite POA defenders in this league. That's the kind of guy that the Warriors need to go out and get. And that's the kind of guy that you have to prioritize over a guy like Buddy Hield if you're the front office. But then again, it wasn't the front office's idea to go get Buddy Hield. It was Steve Kerr's idea. And you can see why that is. The guy is willing to give Buddy Hield the final shot of a game in overtime in the final game of the season with their eligibility for the playoffs on the line over Steph Curry, man. Steve Kerr is an insane individual. I don't know what else to say about that situation. You either see it or you don't. But yes, you can clearly see the impact of Chris Dunn on the Clippers. Even though he's a little bit undersized, the guy is a dog. And you need a bunch of dogs on any championship caliber team. And yet another reason why you need to get Steve Kerr out of here, because this is the kind of guy who influences the front office to go pick up a guy like Buddy freaking Hield. Everybody knows Buddy Hield is not a winning player. The guy has never been to the playoffs in his life up until last season, where he was minimally used because he's obviously not good enough. Boy, would Steve Kerr absolutely and utterly fail miserably if he was ever to play the role of a scout. The guy doesn't know what wins games and what doesn't win games. It's insane! And Jimmy Butler played a nearly flawless game. He was about as aggressive as we've ever seen him. He ended up with 30 points and 9 rebounds, but he also only had 1 rebound in this game. And he's playing the power forward position. Not good enough. He needs more help from a rebounding standpoint. And clearly, just Draymond alone is not good enough. That is why you put Guy Santos next to those two guys over the likes of Pods, Moody, Buddy Hield, GP2, whatever else you can think of. Or just stick Looney or Trace in there for longer stretches so that they do a better job as an overall unit from a defensive standpoint, from a rebounding standpoint. And by the way, Jimmy Butler suffered a nasty Charlie horse late in this game and he was limping around, and that really sucks. That's probably going to linger for a while and he's going to have to play through that. Hopefully it's not too deep of a bone bruise, but it looked like he was in significant pain from that. And then you have Draymond Green, who suffered a neck injury early on in that first quarter. He was able to come back, but you can see how Draymond at the center spot alone, next to these small ass guys next to him, isn't good enough. Draymond also only 3 rebounds in this game. Not good enough. You have 4 rebounds between your power forward and center, masquerading as a power forward and center, because clearly they're not really power forward and centers when you talk about Jimmy Butler and Draymond Green. They're masquerading as that, and they're winning games despite the fact that they have this handicap situation that they have to overcome. That's how good these players are. But you can only do so much with such a handicap created by Steve Kerr. And yes, Steph Curry got hot in that fourth quarter, 18 points in that fourth quarter, and was just off the charts. He was incredible. It looked like the Warriors were going to pull it off. But Draymond Green, at the end of the fourth quarter, there's 17 seconds left in the game, and there's like 10 seconds on the shot clock for the Clippers. And then Draymond intentionally fouls Kawhi Leonard, even though Kawhi Leonard was still in front of him. And that took away the Warriors' final offensive possession, and Draymond managed to get a stop against Kawhi Leonard on the final possession to send the game to overtime. But fouling Kawhi Leonard, taking away his own team's chance to win the game with Kawhi Leonard in front of him. It's not like Kawhi got by Draymond. Draymond was still in front of Kawhi. Is a complete and utter mistake. And again, Steph Curry closing this game from an offensive standpoint, but the Warriors not being able to get any stops on the other end of the floor. That's not real basketball. That's literally the level of a play-in team. You're just good enough to compete because you have offensive power in Steph Curry, but you're not good enough to get stops consistently. And that's not a real team. I'm going to just keep saying it over and over and over again. That is not a real team. And maybe the Warriors needed to lose this game to teach Steve Kerr a lesson, because in the playoffs, this is not going to work. Nor will it work in the play-in. It's not going to work. I'm telling you it's not going to work, and every time I tell you something is not going to work, it doesn't work. And Paz, you look at the stat sheet, he had a great game. Not to take away from his productivity, but ultimately it comes down to positional need. Steve Kerr has to choose between GP2 and Paz from a defensive standpoint. Even though GP2 was not good enough in this game, he also needs more help in the back line. It can't be Steph Curry and Paz next to Jimmy Butler and Draymond Green. It's not good enough defensively. So just like how I said, you have to choose between Potts and Moody. You have to choose between GP2 and Potts. You can't have these two guys on the floor at the same time as Steph Curry. You know, if you're Steve Kerr, the player, this is the equivalent of the Bulls closing a game with Michael Jordan, Steve Kerr, and Randy Brown. It doesn't make any sense. You have more size and better defenders to close the game. Why are you closing with Randy Brown and Steve Kerr? If you want Steve Kerr in there to be the shooter, then you gotta get Randy Brown out of there. And Moses Moody in the first half of the game at least did some really positive things from a defensive standpoint. A lot of POA ability, a lot of deflections, a lot of hands-on ball. He did a really good job. But once again, he cannot overcome the fact that the Warriors are too small. I know they have an influx of talent from the small guys. Potts, Moody, Buddy Hield, GP2, okay? But you need to pick and choose these guard lineups that Steve Kerr keeps casually throwing out there thinking that it's totally fine. It's not fine. And I've been warning about this all season long, literally. You guys know I've been warning about this all season long. It's not real basketball. It's not serious basketball. When they run into real playoff caliber teams, they're going to run into problems and they're going to end up losing these games. And that's assuming they're able to get out of the play-in. And you're going too small, and you got guys in positions that they shouldn't be in. Now Jimmy Butler's injured, Draymond is injured, Steph Curry's injured. The three most guys are playing through all kinds of injuries now. The big bodies are supposed to ease the defense in various junctures of the game, and Steve is not doing those things. He's so selfish and careless about the physical nature of what happens to his team when they go too small. Steve Kerr played a 9-man rotation tonight. Their bench units were Quinton Post, Buddy Hield, and. He needs to change that. Kevon Looney, GP2 in there, fine. Get Guy Santos in there and get Trayce Jackson-Davis in there and get a real defensive unit coming off your bench. Forget the shooting. Prioritize Steph Curry and Jimmy Butler-centric offense and get a bunch of stops, and you'll be able to create massive separation against most of these teams. Right now, Steve Kerr is playing play-in caliber to out-of-the-play-in lineups. He needs to be playing playoff caliber lineups and championship caliber lineups. Are they championship caliber? Maybe, but you need to first play your playoff caliber lineups to see how viable you are as a potential championship caliber team. You can't do that if you're not even playing your playoff lineups. And I know there's going to be some goofy people who are going to be like, oh, this is because Jonathan Kuminga didn't play. No, the only reason they even had a chance to go into overtime was because Kuminga was out of the rotation. With Kuminga, you have a whole separate issue where even though he has his size, he doesn't play up to that size anyway. And more importantly than size, he just disconnects everything the Warriors are trying to do. And to once again have Jonathan Kuminga on this roster, it's supposed to be a $200 million player, and it's supposed to be a vital part of the Warriors' success, and yet he's unusable in the most important game of the season. Just like how he ended up being useless once he got into the playoffs in his second year in the 22-23 season. Useless against the Kings. Steve Kerr completely took him out of the rotation for good reason, by the way. 2 years later, nothing has changed. And that, I'm always going to say this, is on nobody but Joe Lacob for forcing this kid down the throat of the Warriors, Steph Curry, Steve Kerr. It's the one thing that I don't blame Steve Kerr for. You can't help the fact that Jonathan Kuminga is not a playoff caliber player. And that's why I've been warning for years and years and years now. I said they needed to trade him before this deadline was up. They needed to trade him last season, and they needed to trade him the season before that. I know a real defensive player when I see one, and I know a non-defensive player when I see one. My scouting for the Warriors when it comes to defensive ability of the players is next to none. If you look at my track record, I have never been wrong on this. It's time to heed my warnings when I give warnings. It's driving me insane. Everywhere I look, these small-ass lineups, the Warriors are forced to help left and right. And you even see a guy like Kawhi Leonard being left wide open because the Warriors are helping everywhere. And like I said, using a 4-guard lineup, using Moody in there in that Steph Curry-centric lineup instead of Guy Santos is a gargantuous error, because to successfully run a Steph Curry-centric lineup, you need the defense to hold up, and Moody at power forward is not holding anything up for the Warriors defense. And this live and die by Buddy Hield mindset, live and die by the 3-guard lineup mindset of Steve Kerr will be the death of the Warriors. Unless he's able to fix these things up, sadly for all of us Warriors fans, it's over. The fact that they have Steph Curry, Jimmy Butler, and Draymond Green on this team right now is being completely wasted by the complete idiocy of Steve Kerr. And now you can see why I have been calling for the firing of this guy throughout the course of the season before Jimmy Butler came along and fixed a lot of the issues that Steve Kerr created. And somehow, some way or another, Steve put Guy Santos into the equation and the Warriors looked like a thriving team. And then the next step from that was to put Trayce Jackson-Davis also into the equation. Instead of doing that, he took out the 2 most important players coming off their bench next to Loon and GP2. And I'll say it one more time. I have the contact of somebody who is a very prominent figure in the Warriors organization. I'm going to make a separate video because obviously the tone that I'm using right now, it's not the most flattering and it's not going to convince anybody to listen to me. So I'm going to take the emotions out of the equation and objectively break down why the Warriors keep struggling against a team like the Clippers and how they can fix it up. And again, if this well-respected individual that I also have great respect for can't agree upon some of the things that I say and relay this message to Steve Kerr, and the Warriors get Guy Santos in there and stop prioritizing these small lineups, the Warriors still have a viable path to get out of the play-in, get into the playoffs, and then be a problem for any team in the playoffs. Any team. And that can only happen if they maximize their defensive capability. We'll see what happens. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time.